In the Middle Ages, Europe and the Middle East stood divided between two worlds, Christianity in the West and Islam in the East. Between them lay a thin and dangerous frontier, guarded by the ancient Byzantine Empire. For centuries, it had held the line. Until a new force thundered out of Central Asia, the Seljuk Turks, nomads of the steppe, fierce horsemen newly converted to Sunni Islam. They carved out a mighty empire, then struck the Byzantines a blow so devastating that it shook the Christian world. In 1071, at Manzikert, the Byzantine army was crushed. Anatolia, heartland of the empire, was lost. Great cities like Nicaea and Antioch fell to Turkish rule, and the empire staggered under the weight of defeat. When the Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah died in 1092, his empire splintered into rival warlords. But for Byzantium, chaos brought little comfort. Traders descended on their lands, hunting plunder and territory. With his empire collapsing, Emperor Alexius I Komnenos sent a desperate plea westward. He begged the Pope for help. What came next was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Pope Urban II saw the emperor's call not just as a plea but as an opportunity, a chance to unite the Christian world, to restore the authority of the papacy, and to reclaim Jerusalem, the most sacred city on earth, lost to Muslim rule for nearly 400 years. At Clermont in France, the Pope delivered a sermon that sent shockwaves across Europe. He called on knights and peasants alike to march east, to rescue their fellow Christians, and to free Jerusalem. And then he spoke the words that changed everything. Whoever goes to Jerusalem for devotion alone may wipe away all sins. Two warriors who lived by the sword. This was salvation. The crowd erupted. Dies Vult, God wills it. And the greatest mass movement of the medieval world was born. Thousands took the cross. Lords, knights, peasants, women, children, an entire continent began to move. But the first wave was not the disciplined army the Pope imagined. It was the people's crusade. Tens of thousands led by Peter the Hermit. Swept up in religious fervor, they attacked Jewish communities in the Rhineland, massacring thousands. Then, starving and undisciplined, they looted Christian lands on their way east. Byzantine forces hurried them across the Bosphorus Strait into Turkish territory. There they were ambushed and destroyed almost to the last. But the crusade was far from over. The great lords of Europe soon arrived at Constantinople with real armies, armored knights, seasoned infantry, skilled commanders. Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, Robert of Normandy, and many more. 60,000 strong, the largest army seen in Europe since ancient Rome. Alexius demanded oaths. The Crusader leaders swore that any former Byzantine lands they captured would be returned. Only then were they ferried into Anatolia. The march was brutal. Scorching heat, scarce food, and the constant threat of Turkish ambushes. At Nicaea they triumphed only to see the city surrender to the Byzantines, leaving the Crusaders bitter and suspicious. At Dorylaeum, they walked into a trap surrounded by Turkish horse archers. For hours, arrows rained down. But when Godfrey's forces arrived, the Crusaders charged as one. Their heavy cavalry smashed into Turkish lines, and the enemy broke. It was a stunning victory. The Crusaders pushed through mountains, deserts, and starvation. Baldwin of Boulogne seized Edessa and became its ruler, the first Crusader state. But the main army marched on, toward Antioch, and there the crusade nearly died. Antioch's walls were massive, its citadel perched high on a mountain. Crusaders could not surround it. Winter came. Supplies vanished. Men starved. Desertion spread. Reinforcements from the sea kept hope alive. Barely. Then Bohemond found a traitor inside the walls. One night, 60 Crusaders climbed a tower and opened the gates. The city fell, its people slaughtered. But now the Crusaders were trapped inside, surrounded by a huge Turkish army, led by Carthaginian of Mosul. With no food, no help, and no way out, defeat seemed certain. Then inside Antioch, a relic was found, the Holy Lance said to have pierced Christ's side. Believers saw it as a message from heaven. Their faith reignited. And so, starving and outnumbered, they marched out of the gates and attacked. Carthaginian's army broke. Antioch was saved. Months later, after endless disputes and delays, the Crusaders headed south. Fatimid scouts burned wells, destroyed crops, and stripped the land bare. But nothing stopped the Crusaders. And then, on June 7th, 1099, they saw it. Jerusalem. For many, it was the first time they had ever wept with joy. But joy alone would not take the city. With no wood for siege towers, the Crusaders were stuck until a Genoese fleet arrived. The sailors dismantled their own ships and hauled the timbers overland. Now the Crusaders had their towers. On July 8th, they marched barefoot around Jerusalem's walls, praying for victory. A week later, the final assault began. Arrows darkened the sky, stones crashed down, fire spread. But Godfrey moved his tower to a weak point in the defenses. And there his men crossed onto the walls. Jerusalem was breached. What followed was chaos and bloodshed. In a frenzy of religious fury, the Crusaders slaughtered soldiers and civilians, Muslims and Jews, men, women, and children. It was brutal. It was shocking, but in that age, it was not unique. After 3 long years against impossible odds, the First Crusade had achieved the impossible. Jerusalem was in Christian hands. A month later, the Crusaders crushed a Fatimid army at Ascalon. Their vows fulfilled, most returned home. Only a few hundred knights stayed to defend the new kingdom of Jerusalem. Godfrey of Bouillon became its leader defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Pope Urban II, who had ignited this firestorm, never lived to hear of the victory. He died 2 weeks before the news reached Rome. Around Jerusalem, new Crusader states emerged: Ida, Antioch, Tripoli, fragile outposts, surrounded by enemies. But the Muslim world would not remain divided forever. Unity and vengeance would rise again. And for nearly 2 centuries, the Holy Land would be a battleground of faith, ambition, and war. The First Crusade remains one of history's most extraordinary stories, an impossible march across continents. Forged by faith, drenched in blood, and crowned by a victory no one believed could ever happen.